Welcome everyone to Male Fuzz TV. I am Peter and today I'm going to be talking about The Boys, Season 4, Episode 4. It's called Wisdom of the Ages. So spoilers for the episode as always. And where do I start? I guess I start with Homelander. Everyone's going to be talking about what Homelander gets up to in this episode. I guess I'll start there. It was a good episode. I'll start with that. Let's just get the blanket statement out of the way. It was maybe even a great episode. There was less screen time devoted to things I wasn't as into this time. And when they did devote the screen time to Frenchie's subplot, they at least kind of got it past its next hurdle by the end of the episode. So that's good. Maybe we can do some more interesting things from there. And I know I said I was going to start with Homelander, but since I'm talking about this, the only thing I really have to say about Frenchie's plot, other than the whole he's got a scar on his ankle that will identify him to his boyfriend, is really just that I was pleased with the reaction of the boyfriend. It felt like it was the correct reaction. Like him getting angry and beating the shit out of Frenchie and almost killing him, but backing off at the last second, as Frenchie says, do it because he's so guilty. Like, I think that amount of visceral, like, guttural reaction is what he should have had, right? I think I would have been calling bullshit if he just got emotional and backed away slowly. I think, given that this is the man who killed your entire family whilst you were still pretty young and have lived with that memory, that reaction felt right. I don't really have much more to add to that as of yet, other than just the broad sense that this is going deep into like Frenchie's inciting incident of his past, much like all the characters seem to be doing, including Homelander. In fact, I forgot to mention last review that the ending of the last episode where he was standing in front of the mirror, I mentioned the mirror and the cracked glass, but I didn't mention what it actually led to was him thinking about the red door, right? The bad room and all that stuff, which is what he does this episode. Homelander does not interact with any of the regular characters this episode. He goes to the lab, I guess we'll call it, the containment center, the place where he was experimented on as a child as they were testing his abilities. And he interacts with some of the people who worked there at the time. He has memories of them, and he probably has some revenge to dish out. In fact, he definitely does, because we see a man burn alive. We see a man get his dick lasered off. Well, we don't see it, thankfully, because this is The Boys. They could have just showed it. Like, they could have, if not the actual separation, I was kind of half expecting to see it lying on the floor afterwards. Obviously, it still felt gruesome because you see the hole from the other side, and that's pretty, you know, it feels weird to say something's fun in the context of this, but that's a fun visual effect, right? I know the context is a bit weird to say that, but it's a fun visual, seeing Homelander laugh maniacally through the hole of this guy's crotch. But I think obviously it was a very uncomfortable scene because of what he was making him do before that, right? Like, everything that built up to it was very good. Homelander shows up to these people. They're clearly all terrified. And he's brought them cake, and he says that it's a bit of a homecoming, and he's talking to them all. But of course, he's going to slowly reveal what his grudges are with the various people that are here. And there's two that we focus on. There's the guy who he burns in the incinerator. Now, this was an incinerator room that they used to test Homelander's abilities. So they'd burn him to see if he'd survive, and he did. Obviously, wasn't very pleasant. And Homelander, we find out, has this very specific memory of when they did this one time, and this one guy in the room like threw some paper into the bin. Like, he sort of scrunched it up into a ball and he threw it into a bin, and he did a little sort of fist pump or something when he landed the shot. And that's like the little weird moment that stood out to Homelander all these years, is that while this was happening to him, this guy wasn't even concerned that they were torturing a young boy in the next room. He was just happy that he landed his shot in the wastebasket. I actually really like this. I really like it because, and this is, again, a strange thing to say with Homelander, but this is shockingly relatable, or maybe not relatable, but understandable. Maybe that's a better word. I get why this haunted him. I get why this guy not caring. It was this symbolic moment of this guy just not caring about him and just not caring about the overall atrocity that's going on at this place and what they're doing to this young child. And the sad, ugly truth of this episode, as much as Homelander is absolutely the bad guy and he's absolutely in the wrong and nothing justifies anything he's ever done in this show, He's not sympathetic, but we're kind of like, you know, we've talked in the past about how he didn't have the man Pa Kent. He didn't have Jonathan and Martha Kent raising him, loving him, teaching him right from wrong. And now we're really kind of digging into his past. Like, we're digging into all the characters' kind of origin stories, it seems like, this season. Or at least something that they've been holding on to for a long time that's a really big part of their backstory. It feels like we're really getting a strong sense of nothing justifies what Homelander is or what he does to people or how he acts, but we're starting to get a better understanding of how he ended up that way, of the horrible things that people did to him and the way they treated him. And I think by the end of this episode, we don't have a lot of sympathy for the people that he's doing this to. Although I got the impression that at least a few people in the room were like newer employees that weren't there when he was there. And okay, they're part of the system, but it feels a bit vindictive to kill them too, which he seems to by the end. But that's, I mean, you know, splitting hairs at that point. But the thing about this episode is that Homelander, all of his grievances, now obviously the way he's going after revenge is very unhealthy, and it contradicts wonderfully with Huey in this episode, where Huey forgives A-Train, and he doesn't want to hold on to that hate. It is the complete opposite of Homelander, which is why these two stories in this episode, even though they never interact, are thematically perfect together. That's good writing. I love that. But, you know, he's not wrong about being like mad about this. He's not wrong for like being upset and wanting revenge. It's understandable. It's one of the most understandable things that we've ever had from Homelander, probably, is that he has held this resentment. And part of why he hates human beings so much is because of how he was treated by human beings for the first several years of his life. And it leads to these moments where he forces the guy to go into the incinerator and watch Homelander shoot his last, paper basketball shot, and the guy burns alive, and everyone's horrified, and it's horrific. And then he goes on to the other guy, the one that seems to be kind of in charge, at least out of the people who are there right now. Obviously, the woman that comes down later is higher ranking, but he's like, hey, you were always nice to me, and I always appreciated that. And you can tell there's a turn coming. You know he's going to get scary in a minute. And he brings up a nickname that this guy used to call him Squirty. And the guy claims to not remember this. Homelander then says, do you remember why you started calling me Squirty? And he basically describes that, you know, he was a growing boy and he had needs, as growing boys do. And there'd be like one little window of time when he was doing his rounds, when no one else was around, that he'd effectively not be monitored, right? He'd have a few minutes to himself, maybe 10 minutes, and he would try and masturbate in that time. And this guy caught him, right? One time he just happened to get back before Homelander finished, and he caught him, he laughed, and he called him Squirty. And Homelander's response to this, much like he made the other guy suffer the incinerator, right, in the same way that he did, is to force this man to masturbate in front of everyone else in the room. Well, they're all supposed to be laughing. Homelander asked them to laugh. Obviously, Homelander's the only one that's laughing. Everyone else is deeply unsettled, uncomfortable, and terrified that they're going to die. So it's all very... It's all, you know... This is a really good example of the boys going from the sillier stuff into it becoming more serious, right? In an episode where we have people exploding, we have people, stretching, we have people getting blown in half with a grenade launcher, and it's kind of fun because they're okay and they come back together again and stuff like that. We have this moment here, which truly is disturbing. And it's funny to me that the contrast, because I said, one of the first things I said in this review is that Homelander is maybe the most understandable he's ever been in this show, because we kind of see how he was treated. And what would that do to someone? It probably would mess them up royally. And you mix that with all the power that he's got, and you get a really, really bad end result. This idea that someone who achieves power, who was bullied, say, will then want to bully others when they have power because that was done to them. And it's this sort of vicious cycle. This is amplified a millionfold because he's got Superman powers. But in the episode where he's the most understandable ever, because we see and hear some of these more horrific things about how he was treated as a kid and the upbringing that he had, is also the very same episode where I think he gets the darkest in terms of what he does to people that he's ever done, which I guess makes sense given the personal vendetta he's got here. This isn't him just lasering someone's head off because they've annoyed him. This is the people who fundamentally tortured him as a child. But it is uncomfortable. I mean, I think this scene where he makes the guy masturbate and then cracks, because of course this guy can't get an erection. Of course he can't. Homelander tries to give him some inspiration and says, hey, if you don't get it up, I'm going to laser your dick off. Which, of course, does not help, right? Maybe too much pressure on the poor man. And then he does the lasering, and that's all fine and well, right? So, like, all of this is deeply uncomfortable. And my favorite part of it, although, as much as is engaging and is scary and at times darkly funny, some of this stuff is, it's when the woman comes down, who is a bit more in charge, and doesn't act scared with Homelander. She puts on a tough face, and given what she says to him in a minute, I feel like that tough face is just something she's been doing since he was a kid to appear like she's a person in authority in front of him. But she doesn't act scared. She tells Homelander to put the guy out of his misery. Homelander crushes his head with his foot. Poor woman in the room starts vomiting, because, yeah, of course. And when we come back to these characters and they're talking inside the quote-unquote bad room where he was kept as a kid, we find out from her that the way Homelander is, and this whole idea that he has this deep desire to be loved and liked, and that's been a big part of Homelander, right, since the start of the show, is that one of the big defenses against him going too far, at least on a broad scale, is that he wants to be loved by the public. He wants adoration. He wants people to coddle him and love him because it's something that was absent as a child. And we find out here that Vought, or the scientists specifically involved with raising him, intentionally tried to create that in him. They had psychologists, some of the best psychologists on the planet, basically come up with a way to try and make sure that was a deep-rooted part of his personality, because if he desires all those things, then it's a way to control him, right? It's a way to keep him in line. And sure enough, like the entire show since season 1, what have we been talking about? We've been talking about what is keeping him in line, except the idea that he wants to be loved. I mean, maybe at first it was because Stillwell or Sitwell. Stillwell, Sitwell? You know what I'm talking, Madeline, right? The one with the milk, right? But it kind of developed from there. So why in season 2 and 3 is he not going completely off kilter? And it was this bubbling thing where he was building up to maybe unleashing, and he was clearly getting more and more tempted as time goes on. And this is obviously showing the faults in their plan. They, arrogantly thought, oh, this would keep forever. He will never not obey us because he needs to be liked and adored, and he needs to seek, approval from parental figures or loved ones or whoever. But their arrogance is thinking that that's going to always last and that it's not eventually going to snap. And that's kind of where we are with Homelander. Now that he's trying to do these new things, he's trying to take over like Caesar. He doesn't see humans as equals. He wants to rule them. He doesn't think his son's a human. And she puts up a brave face, but it's very clear by the end of the scene that Homelander's going to kill her. I mean, she says, hey, it doesn't matter if you kill me or anyone else here. Like, it's not going to change anything. But yeah, at the end of the episode, we see that he has murdered them all. There's just body parts and blood everywhere in the bad room. And the final shot of the episode is Homelander laughing, covered in blood. Honestly, I think the acting here from Homelander, or I should say, what's his name? Anthony Starr, sorry. I put an H in his name. I apologize. I think his performance here, he's been great since the start of the show, but I think here he's got a lot sort of higher notes to hit, because he's got a lot more maniacal moments. He's got a lot more uncontrollable laughter. He's got a lot more goading. He's doing a lot more swinging back and forth in moods in a sort of intentional way. It is a little different to the type of evil, mean-spirited kind of attitude that he has had in the past. I think this is a bit more focused, and it's a bit more hitting higher notes, I would say. So I think it was interesting to see him. It does feel like he's kind of cracking, and that obviously we've combined with all the age stuff and him feeling insecure about getting older and starting to think about like what the future is and what he's leaving behind, like all that stuff. Sort of, I mean, it's midlife crisis stuff basically. Like there's a reason why it's all kicking in now, because his mortality's finally starting to rear its ugly head. So yeah, like yeah, all this stuff was super engaging. It moments it was nail biting, other moments it was darkly funny, and then at other moments when he was talking to the woman, it was more like just fascinating hearing. No, a lot of the stuff we've been analyzing about Homelander was like an intentional in-universe thing that they did to him, and that's kind of fascinating from a mythology point of view. And that's kind of what I was getting at when I was saying we can understand Homelander better after this episode, in the sense that what they did to him was evil, right? What they did to him was horrific. Again, it does not justify a single thing that he is, but he is a victim first. He was a victim. It doesn't justify him making other people victims when he grew up and everything he's doing now. But before all of that, he was at first a victim. We also find out that he lasered his way out of his mother's womb and killed like 3 nurses and a doctor or something like that, which just sounds... part of me almost wanted to see it. I almost want to see that sequence, but hey, they can't give me all the crazy gore that I want, but they do give me plenty, and I can't argue with that. Anyway, okay, we're like over 15 minutes, and I've only talked about Homelander. Oh dear. Elsewhere, Huey's dad is going to die. He's been taken off the life support as he wanted. You know, that's what he requested. Huey's not happy about it, so Huey has a plan. He wants to get some compound V to save his dad. So he doesn't really tell Kimiko what he's doing when he asks for her help, for her to be the muscle. But he's actually seeing A-Train, and he's asking A-Train to swipe him some compound V. A-Train is like, no, the only place you can get that now is in Homelander's apartment. I ain't going there. That's dangerous. That's stupid. But Huey says, I'll, like, this is your chance to do something good. And A-Train flat out says, well, if I do this, we're good, right? Like, we're square. Like, I've made up for what I did, right? And it is a bit weird to make a deal for that specifically, but Huey reluctantly seems to agree. But Kimiko is not very thrilled about everything that's happened here. Of course, we end up with a kind of a big action sequence here, because the Shining Light, which is the name I was trying to remember like 2 episodes ago, but they have tracked down Kimiko. They're not here for Huey, but they're here for Kimiko, and they start firing at them. So we get this scene where they run into, I think it was a school they run into, but it was empty. There was no one there, but I think it was a school. But Huey trips and sort of like badly twists his ankles. He can't really run. So Kimiko like gives him like a metal tray as a shield and gives him like a blade and tries to show him where to cut so he can quickly kill someone. And Huey's terrified. In fact, this is probably the most violent Huey has directly had to get, unless I'm forgetting something. But he, stabs someone in the stomach here while fighting for his life, slits their wrist and then slits their neck, and then gets sprayed with blood. It really feels like our boy Huey is really entered the big leagues in terms of having to fight and hold his own a little bit. Not saying that he's in any way capable compared to the others. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, there was a moment. Was it the first episode? Last episode? I can't remember what it was, but there was a quick moment in the headquarters where Starlight was trying to teach him how to punch. Like, they were just like training in the background, basically. I wonder if that was them just trying to see that, oh, he has been practicing a little bit. He's not, like, he knows he's in a dangerous line of work, so he's trying to, like, be better at self-defense, but still, not that I necessarily think it needed it. It felt like he was just narrowly scraping by. I suppose I could see the argument from some people, if they want to complain, that this guy's meant to be a trained killer and Huey's, like, fending him off. I get it. But he is our hero, and I do think the visual of the blood spraying back on Huey's face and his reaction to the fact that he's just done that is a big moment, and I don't think it took me out of it. I kind of alluded to it earlier, but Kimiko gets hit with a grenade launcher during this scene and splits almost in half, and her intestines all come spilling out. She's fine the next time we see her, of course, but it's a whole thing. But much like I was saying about how everything's getting into people's like backstories and like the kind of the big moments in their past. Same with Kimiko and Shining Light and specifically a guilt element here because she helped capture this other young woman who's here, and Kimiko kind of tries to reach out after they've killed everyone else, and the woman just kind of says, "No, you like these scars are from when you helped bring me in." Like, if she's going to patch this up, if she's going to try and win this woman over, it's not going to be easy. Kimiko ends up just like carrying Huey out because Huey can barely walk. But it was a fun sequence. It kind of felt like a random scene out of nowhere in the context of the rest of the episode, but obviously it's advancing Kimiko's plot, and it did give us some fun action, so I ain't complaining. As far as the rest of Huey's plot goes, though, he does, of course, get the Compound V from A-Train, which I suppose I should just mention here that A-Train, when he goes to Homelander's apartment, sees his jar of pubes, does find the Compound V, but then runs into Ashley, who has left a turd in Homelander's toilet. That is her little way of getting back at him. Obviously, she better hope that Homelander doesn't get that shit analysed. I mean, literal, that shit analysed. Because if it leads to her, she's going to melt her. This was just a fun little sequence because they're both like, "You're not meant to be here. Neither are you." Well, I guess we both have a good reason to keep it a secret. They don't actually say that last line, they just say we both have a problem. But that was the implication I got. Maybe they actually made some kind of more intricate deal, but at the very least, whatever. Yeah, so A-Train gives Huey the Compound V. A-Train immediately says, "You are not going to ever forgive me, right?" And he doesn't even try to take the Compound V back. He just sort of is about to leave defeated. And Huey says, "No, you're right. I was going to just tell you to piss off. But to be honest, I've changed my mind. You're forgiven." Puts out his hand and they shake hands. I think what I really appreciate about this moment from an acting point of view, and maybe like how it was written as well, is that A-Train doesn't say anything afterwards. He doesn't really know what to say back to it. It really feels like he's so taken aback that Huey's actually given him this, and it does feel relatively genuine, that it feels like another step that's kind of like maybe A-Train realizing that doing good things leads to feeling better about who he is. And it's a path that, you know, a lot of the characters on this show are on. But it felt like a nice little moment because of that. Obviously, Butcher comes out after. I'll talk about that separately, though. I'll talk about that with Butcher's side of things. But Huey also, and I really like this as well. As much as I've not necessarily been in love with the whole Huey mum plot with the hospital, I did like a detail here, is that Huey chooses not to use the Compound V. Now, Butcher's already said that it didn't work for him, of course, but he makes the choice not to do it. And of course, we've been told repeatedly that it's not what his dad wanted. His dad wanted to be taken off life support in this situation. But when he comes back from the vending machine, and even going to the vending machine to get a coffee or whatever, when he comes back, he brings one for his mum. So that even suggests that he's willing to, you know, continue that further, right? Mend that bridge. Because the big thing he said about A-Train, of course, was that he doesn't want to hold that hate forever. He didn't forgive A-Train for A-Train. He forgave A-Train for himself to let that hate go, because he can't hold on to that forever. And again, really positive moment. And I think Huey choosing not to give his dad the Compound V feels a lot like Butcher in the last few episodes of this show, who's almost done some bad things like his old self, and then chosen not to at the last possible second, right? Like, it feels like there's some good mirroring between some of the characters here. And I think what's so interesting about that Butcher and Huey scene is that they were apart for most of the episode. They weren't really interacting at all. Their relationship's been a big part of this show overall, obviously, but in this episode, they barely interacted. So it feels like a big deal when Butcher steps out. And I think what I liked about it, and I realized I said that I was going to leave this for Butcher side of things, because there's Butcher-specific stuff to talk about. But something I did like about it a lot from kind of a Huey POV of this scene is that it felt like the roles had flipped. Because Butcher was the one telling Huey not to go through with the dumb idea. Butcher was the one saying, no, leave off it, don't do it. In his own way, he was kind of becoming the canary in the coal mine for Huey. And that felt kind of sweet. And it felt like it showed a lot of growth for Butcher at this point, for him to be saying this. Obviously, there's been a lot of little things with Butcher in these last few episodes that have felt like he has grown in some way, but I really like that. Obviously, the big thing at the end of this, though, is that when Huey comes back to the bedroom, or the hospital room, is that it seems like, and maybe I'm misinterpreting this, but it seems like his mum swiped the compound V and put it in herself, and then the dad's eyes open. That's how I read it. It felt like she must have swiped it from him, or maybe she had some of her own somehow. She kept going on about how she had all the Vought beauty products. Maybe she had a little Vata compound V in that case. But I mean, we'll see where that goes. It is interesting though that she's been arguing this whole time to do what Huey's dad wanted. Right? She's been saying that over and over again. There's a nice little irony revealing that she is a bit of a hypocrite here if she's the one who chose to do this. Again, I don't know that for sure. Like I'm making that prediction based on what I saw, but they could take us in some different directions with that. All right, Butcher. I mean, Butcher kind of ties into a lot of other characters as well because there's a lot going on. The main thing of this episode is that what's her name? Firecracker is doing a 6-hour TV show across the street from the Starlighters headquarters, where she's basically just going to badmouth Starlight for 6 hours. Obviously, there's the big revelation towards the end of it, which we see Sage give her. We don't know what it is in that early scene, but Firecracker looks very happy what she's seen on the tablet when Sage shows her it, and then gives her some more, casual racism as a thank you, because that's Firecracker, I guess. But throughout this, there's various plans going on. A big moment early on that I really liked is that when Butcher walks in with Starlight immediately says, "What the hell's he doing here? No." And stands his ground and says, "Look, we're in a bad place. We need him. We're going to use him. And it's my call. I'm team leader. So you have to deal with it." I get why she's hesitant right now. After all, Billy is repeatedly saying things like she's not one of us and so on and so on. So can't blame her for a lick of it. But the moment I really liked here is that there's a moment of tension after that's said, and then Butcher just like changes demeanor. Like he just gets a little smirk and goes into character and says something like, well, aren't we glad that that's all been sorted then, eh? And kind of, he's being Billy Butcher again. But my favorite part of it is that the music, there was just a little note in the bass line, like a little bit of bass guitar or whatever comes in just as the smirk happens, and the music almost brings him into character. It's a really nice little moment. But it really emphasizes this idea that Butcher is kind of putting on an act to an extent. Obviously, this is still who he is, and he's always done this act. But it feels like he's having to try extra hard. And we see more moments of him here like, almost collapsing, asking to like save Ryan if he can't before he dies. If he doesn't have time, please can you do it? And even gives a genuine compliment by calling him a great father. Which doesn't know how to process getting such a nice compliment from Billy, but it's a moment, and we see more of Becca sort of looking over the shoulder and almost kind of like not wanting Billy to ask for this help. The idea that she's there to urge him to be the one to do it, like it has to be him personally. But of course, we know that she's just in his head. But interesting scene again. It's seeing Billy in a slightly different light that I really enjoy. Seeing these characters evolve and change, and it really does feel like Billy's changing a lot in season 4, and has done maybe between seasons as well. But their plan is to try and blackmail Firecracker for information, because they've got a report that she was busted when she was younger for having sex with an underage boy, right? The boy was like 15 and she was like a counselor at the camp or something like that. As Billy put it, he tickled your fancy, and then he tickled more than that, which is a phenomenal line of dialogue. I have to say, I love that. Especially because Firecracker, after a few of his lines, is like, "Would you please talk American? I can't understand a word you're saying." And Butcher is, he's always been thick slang. He's always been thick with I don't know if it's quite Cockney. I mean, I'm not good with specific dialects, but it's, it's something in that kind of range. So I do wonder actually how the Americans fare with his dialogue. Like I assume by this point in season 4 you're all used to it, but I do wonder if back in season 1 if you were turning on the subtitles just to like help a bit. Because it is very thick. Like he's doing a really thick accent with a lot of like colloquialisms that are not like obvious. But regardless, so she basically surprises them by just hitting the tweet button on his phone. Like she's just taking control of it and going out, and she goes right out on stage on her TV show and gets all emotional and admits that she's sinned and that it was her path from God to see the light, and she's doing better now because of it. Yada yada yada. You know, it was, yeah, like the fact that, I mean, she's obviously not a super religious character. I mean, she kind of is, but you know, she's not like there's the Mr. Fantastic dude who's literally a pastor kind of guy, or at least a preacher. She's just kind of using that and banking on the whole right wing religion kind of stuff. But there is something to be said about her like secret sin, if you will, that the public might not like, is being with someone underage, just because, you know, the church. I couldn't help but draw that parallel in my head when that came up. But she takes this and uses it. And what I thought was interesting about this from a thematic point of view as well is that this, just like all the main character stories, is our two main characters, Billy and MM, come to her thinking they've got the upper hand because they've got something from her past, a big moment from her past, just like we're exploring big moments from the past of all the other characters, right? All their inciting, hero-defining kind of journey moments. She immediately just uses it. She takes it and manipulates it and turns it into a tool to just further what she's doing out on stage. She just completely takes it and bastardizes it, and it shows how this enemy can do that, how they can just manipulate the information to suit what they're doing, right? And that's part of the danger of this type of character and this type of threat. So I like that. I also like it because it's kind of like it's an interesting mix because of what she does to Starlight a little bit later, right? You know, this idea that they had this scoop on something she'd done, and she's able to just like take control of it and own it immediately and weaponize it almost. But then later, they blindside everyone, including the audience. One of my favorite details of this, honestly, is that we, the audience, did not know about this pregnancy. This was, unless I'm forgetting something, but I don't think I am. We never knew that Starlight got pregnant and that her and Huey had decided to have an abortion. That is something we did not know. And I think that is a genius bit of storytelling to not tell us that in advance. Because it would be so easy to do a melodramatic plot for a couple of episodes last season where they're making that choice and she's weighing up the options and we get to the choice. The choice to not tell us until it's flooded upon the world, and potentially even all of the other characters don't know this. Like, we don't get a confirmation, but the reactions in the room from MM and Billy and the others kind of suggested to me that they did not know about this, that this was something that was completely private between the two of them, as it should be, because as Huey says later, it's no one else's business. But of course, their reaction is different to the angry crowd. Their reaction is that of sympathy. Their reaction is that of, oh shit, this is bad that they're bringing this out. We shouldn't know this. Very different, because Firecracker's now using it to call her a baby killer and whipping all this, you know, language at her. And of course, that's what triggers Starlight to go out and confront her. And she starts beating the piss out of Firecracker. And Firecracker just takes it. She seems a little surprised at the first punch, but she notably does not even really try and fight it back because she knows how this looks on camera. This is going to make Starlight look crazy, like she's got a temper, like she's unhinged, and her entire speech beforehand was that, you know, these teenagers she's protecting aren't safe with this baby killer. I think that was the final line that set Starlight off, was that particular sentiment. And she goes out and, you know, beats the shit. And MM like eventually grabs her and says, "Look around," and she realizes this has all been on camera, and she looks unhinged. And what I really like about the choice of characters here is, do you remember last season where MM punched the stepdad character, right? Todd, or whatever his name was. Remember that? Remember how he got angry and he finally punched him? And the guy kind of deserved it, so we, the audience, kind of enjoyed it. And to be fair, it's the same here. Firecracker kind of deserves at least one punch, and we kind of enjoy it, but then we immediately get as an audience that Starlight's fallen into this trap and the optics are bad. And last season with he turned and realized that his daughter saw him do this, that his daughter saw him be angry. He's not the influence that he wants to be in her. He's not the better person he wants to be in her. So I thought it was a very symbolic thing to me that was the one that came up and like pulled her off Firecracker and said, hey, look around. Him having that awareness, it shows that he's obviously a good leader for the team, but I think it also ties back in thematically to that moment from last season. There's a really nice little link there that he like recognized, maybe, but certainly before Starlight did, but maybe before others did, what was happening here and how it was going to be used. So really good. And obviously this breaks Starlight. She's heartbroken afterwards. You know, her and Huey's scene, who again, this is actually a really interesting example of just how good you can have lots of character relationships established by this point in a TV show. Because we're 4 seasons in, and much like the Billy and Huey scene in the alleyway, this Annie and Huey scene in the headquarters where he's trying to comfort her and he's angry as well about this and all that. Like, both of these scenes felt like big scenes that felt like big moments for these two sets of relationships, both of which involve Huey. But neither one had been focused on for the rest of the episode. It wasn't like we'd spent a subplot doing Annie and Huey stuff or Billy and Huey stuff. We were able to just slide into those two scenes effortlessly, and they felt big. And if anything, they almost felt bigger because they hadn't been interacting for the rest of the episode. It felt like a bigger deal when they were back in a room together, and like Huey had done all his solo stuff, and Annie's here having done her stuff. It just really, really good stuff. Before that meltdown, though, there was a whole, or in fact, during the meltdown, Frenchie went to investigate Firecracker's trailer. Butcher. Why I'm forgetting Butcher's name randomly in the middle of this, I don't know. But Butcher had swiped the keys to Firecracker's trailer, which also you could argue is a little foreshadowing of Huey getting pickpocketed later on, potentially by his mum. He gives it to Frenchie and tells Frenchie to go and investigate, and Frenchie does. He sees everything's got red, white, and blue on it. She sees her purse is like a gun that's made up of blue, red, and white diamonds. It's like so tacky. It is immensely tacky. But anyway, Mr. Fantastic pastor dude finds Frenchie and doesn't buy his lie that he's just lost. But Butcher ends up intervening with a fire extinguisher, which was set up earlier on because he used it as a weapon earlier in a sort of blunt force kind of way. But they did emphasize on the label that it was liquid nitrogen. Now, I have never seen a fire extinguisher that says it's liquid nitrogen on the outside, but I'm not going to say they don't exist. It's entirely possible they do. It probably would be effective in putting out a fire, so, you know, they maybe do exist. I don't think I've ever seen it in the wild, though. But we do get this fun scene, though, where Mr. Fantastic puts out his hand, stretches it out, and Butcher freezes it with the liquid nitrogen and then smashes it off with a crowbar with a grin on his face, because, of course. The big thing here is that Butcher's getting beat. Mr. Fantastic, after this, has his arm wrapped around his neck, and he's strangling him, he's dying. Ghost Becca is telling him to, stay in the fight or whatever. And he blacks out, and then when he wakes up, Mr. Fantastic has been blown up into pieces, right? There's just parts of him everywhere. And my initial read on this was that it must have been Newman. I was going for a Seinfeld joke there. I don't know if that came across, but yeah, Newman, right? I thought, oh, maybe Newman was around and she did that because, I mean, why she wants to help Billy at this point after the asshole photo, I don't know, but that's the only thing that made sense in the moment. But of course, the thing that made me think otherwise was the alley scene with Huey, where Billy admitted that he had taken Compound V, the regular stuff, to try and save his life, and all it did was speed up his demise. But it didn't give him powers. That's what he says. Or doesn't, it implies it didn't anyway. But there's a moment after Huey leaves where he turns to Ghost Becca and says, "What happened to me back there?" And it felt like it was implying that when he blacked out, it wasn't someone else that came in and saved him. That maybe he did do something. Maybe he does have some kind of power now that he's just not learned how to control yet, that he doesn't understand. obviously we keep seeing those little wriggly things under his skin that are moving around, and that was happening right before he blacked out. Is it possible that that's tied to his power? Hey, maybe if he uses his powers, it'll delay his death. Maybe it'll it's like discharging all the build up energy or something like that, and he'll actually be not necessarily fine forever, but maybe they'll think he's going to be okay before the end of the season. Because after all, we're going to have season 5, which is the last season, and there's no way that Butcher's not making it until the very last episode. Like I'm sure he's going to die in that last episode. Like I'm all but certain of it, but he is definitely getting to that last episode. A push, maybe the penultimate episode, but even then, I highly doubt it. So anyway, yeah, maybe Butcher has some kind of power. We'll see. In fact, maybe this power has something to do with why he's seeing Becca the way he is. Maybe it's not just a traditional, oh, he's seeing his dead loved one inside his head. Not that I'm saying that he's actually seeing the real her. It's still just part of him. But I'm wondering if the fact that he's seeing her the way that he is maybe brought on by his condition or potentially by a side effect of his power. After all, if he blew him up with his mind, then that would at least imply a mind power. Now, admittedly, making someone pop like a balloon and seeing a dead person in your head aren't exactly linked, other than just the fact that they're both brain related, I guess. But either way, interesting to think about. Yeah. No Kessler this episode. Actually, I heard a theory from one of my audience before I watched this episode. They think, again, this is just a theory, so it's not a spoiler, but they think that Kessler's also just in Billy's head, and it's going to be a little reveal later on. And at first, I was unsure about it, and I'm not like convinced that's the case. If nothing else, because he gave him like a substance to try and knock out Ryan. There's some little tangible things to maybe hold on to it. But to be fair, Kessler has not interacted with another human being, so that part is possible. And then the part of it that I do kind of like is that he's if Becca's the angel on his shoulder who is saying, to save Ryan, to do the right things, it does kind of feel like every time Kessler's been in a scene, he's been telling him to, no, you have to capture Ryan, you have to do the bad thing. He's kind of the devil on his shoulder in a lot of ways. The idea that, again, it's if we're bringing things from people's past back to kind of influence what they're doing now and grow and change, Kessler represents Billy at his darkest back when he was doing just Depop stuff. And Becca is obviously the bright side of Billy. So, it may not be the case. I mean, like, that could completely go out the window the second we see Kessler interact with someone else in a future episode. But it was an interesting thought, just for the whole angel and devil on the shoulder kind of aspect to it. Because Becca's definitely filling that role, seemingly for the most part. But is there anything else that I've not talked about? I already brought up Frenchie confessing and getting punched to shit. The Deepened Sage didn't have much this episode. She did tell him he was revolting in a scene, which confused him. And then later on, she invites him over, gets him more takeout, and wants his help to do a frontal lobotomy and explains. So, if for anyone who didn't get it last episode, and I didn't get it immediately, it was only because I looked it up, but they did go out of their way to explain it. So if you're not the sort of person who's watching reviews of a show week to week, and you're not seeking out other people's opinions and like sharing ideas about a TV show, if you're just watching it on your own, like, I have to give the show credit here because they made sure it was clear this episode what that was last episode. So, even if you didn't get what it was implying with the poker last episode, this episode spelled it out. It made it clear. It made sure all the audience understood what was happening. She says it in no uncertain terms. I think what's interesting here, obviously it's funny that, the Deep feels weird about putting a big metal rod behind her eyeball until she says he can have anal sex once he's done it, and then he immediately just like says, all right, okay, where does it go? point me in the right direction. That was funny. I do think it's interesting though how it kind of maybe reshapes how I was viewing that scene from last time now, because if she's making this choice before she's done the lobotomy, where we know she finds him revolting in a normal sense, but she's accepting that once she's had the lobotomy she will be okay being with him, it does color it a little bit different, just in the sense that it feels more like she's okay from a moral point of view to be around the Deep, which was something I still thought wasn't true last time. Like last time I was thinking, oh, the Deep just happened to show up when she was already in this state. I assume this is a stronger lobotomy than whatever she did to herself, because I assume she went through the ear last time. I could be wrong. That's just an assumption. It seems like the easier place to go in. I don't know if you can do a lobotomy through the ear. My lobotomy knowledge is a little bit lacking, I admit. but here she's making this choice, and maybe it's just because she knows that once she's done this, just like she enjoys bad movies when she's done, she knows she'll like this asshole as well. And there's something to that, the turn your brain off kind of mentality to it. And maybe that gets us into some deeper ideas with this character, with Sage, this idea that maybe too many people do turn their brain off. And while it makes sense that the smartest person in the world who's burdened with too much knowledge has to do it to just cope and relax, the idea that too many people in the real world are constantly just keeping their brain turned off, not just because they're wanting to enjoy dumb entertainment, but because they don't critically think about things that are important either. And I think they can maybe do some things here with that as we get more with this character. I'll be curious to pay attention to that as we go through. I suppose I'd also mention that the president-elect was going to be working with Starlight, but then calls her at the end of the episode, basically saying that what just happened was he can't be associated with her anymore. Her image is ruined, and that just breaks Starlight's heart. That's actually the final moment I think we see of her, is her breaking down after that phone call. So yeah, it's not a happy time for a lot of the characters right now. They're going through some stuff, which is to be expected, I guess. But it was a very good episode. Is it the best episode of the season so far? It might be. I'd have to really sort of stop and think about it. I think there's an argument for the last couple. I think the first one was probably the weakest. But I mean, it's mostly splitting hairs, but there was a lot of big stuff in this episode. I mean, the fact that I've talked for what will probably be 50 minutes by the time I've finished doing the outro here says all it needs to be said. There was a lot of meat in the bone, a lot of things to talk about, probably a lot of things that I still didn't even dive into. But thank you for joining me. You can support all the content over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and get some bonuses for your trouble. It's what lets me keep doing this on a consistent basis. All the TV reviews and all the movie podcasts over in MailFuzz Movies. Go check out those if you haven't. But that is me, so thank you once again for watching or listening. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?